welcome to Rebel Book Club. This is our virtual events platform. So we're going to have a little chat, obviously, centered around midnight in Chernobyl, but you can just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your involvement in nuclear power.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Well, I'm Sue Ian, and I worked in the nuclear power sector for over 30 years before moving into more general energy matters a few years ago. I started off life as an engineer in the fuel manufacturing facility, the one that makes nuclear fuel for the UK and some overseas reactors, and it's near Preston. And so I was a technical support person when I first joined, and then rose through the ranks of the company to become the Chief Technology Officer for the whole of the UK's nuclear fuel cycle R&D people and facilities. So 1,000 people, 5 labs, that sort of thing. I've also served on a number of government and international committees, chairing some of them associated with the nuclear sector, most latterly the Nuclear Innovation Research Advisory Board for the UK, and I'm currently the president of the National Skills Academy for Nuclear. So that's my potted history.
Brilliant. I mean, I've been calling you the rock star of nuclear power, and I think that that's well deserved listening to that.
I think that's a bit extreme, personally.
What's been your career highlight so far?
Well, I suppose the highlight would be sitting with more than one Prime Minister, advocating that we should take nuclear energy a bit more seriously, and actually being, listened to and having them change policy slightly. So I suppose that was one of the highlights. But I mean, the other highlight has been working with some of the most fantastic people globally. Some of the best talent the world has to offer. That's been very exciting, very rewarding, and being able to go to many places that people wouldn't get the opportunity to go to. I've been to the middle of Siberia, I've been to China, Japan, most of Europe, United States. All on nuclear business. So it's been very rewarding.
What was more nerve-wracking? Would it be meeting the Queen or choosing your desert island discs? Because for me, I think it would be a difficult toss-up.
Yeah, no, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure that you can compare them, to be honest. They were both, one was quite scary, although at the time, proved actually to be quite really relaxing in the end. The desert island discs was kind of a unique experience, and that was good fun in the end, trying to select the small number of discs you're allowed to choose.
Where were you working in April 1986? What was your role when Chernobyl unfolded?
I was in charge of the technical support to the fuel production plants, and I had a small team of R&D specialists and some labs to look after, which helped me in that role. So we were looking at, as well as supporting the existing plants, at developing new manufacturing processes to make different and more modern fuels for the reactors. Well, I remember it being a really big deal at the time, particularly in the press, because the news when the news eventually came out, it came out very fast, and there were a lot of scare stories in the media at the time. But I also remember the company and the nuclear sector generally organising, a series of factual briefings for the staff as soon as possible, so that we could get hold of the actual facts as opposed to what was being speculated, and so we could understand the issues and be a lot more knowledgeable and able to answer questions like, could it happen here? The answer is no, because our reactors were very different and didn't have the same safety issues as the Russian RBMK ones. So that's what I remember most from that period. Well, it didn't really affect our work, because our systems and actually those internationally more generally were so different from the Russian systems, which were only in Russia or the Soviet satellite states at the time. As a consequence, it made things a lot more transparent internationally and open, with a lot of willingness to share. The Russians were very willing to share what had happened, because they were as concerned retrospectively by what had happened too. And so it led to a number of international bodies being created, things like the World Association of Nuclear Operators, which all the operators of the reactors worldwide, whether they're in China or the United States or here or Russia or anywhere, to ensure that standards are improved and maintained. And it also meant that key modifications were made to the RBMK reactors, which were still continuing to operate, so that the same problem couldn't possibly occur in the future. So those were the immediate short-term things that happened and have been sustained over the last 40 or so years. True. And also these days, there are international inspection panels which go around reactors and reactor sites to make sure that what they're being told is actually what they see. It doesn't matter whether it's in China or here or United States. The safety standards are high and are being maintained and regulated, so that's so.
It sounds like it had some positive impacts on the industry itself and communication within the sector. But what about public perception and how people were receiving news about nuclear power across the board?
I mean, it had a negative impact, which took a long time to recover because, Chernobyl wasn't that long after 3 Mile Island. So, a generation of people grew up with knowledge of, an incident in the United States, which didn't result in any release of radiation at all, 3 Mile Island, and Chernobyl, which resulted in a big release of radiation across many countries. And it had a negative impact. Most countries' opinions recovered over the next 15, 20, 25 years. The only country that maintained a very negative view of it, which was Germany. That's countries which already had nuclear power plants. Germany really has not favoured nuclear energy since that time. And it's taken really until the recent decade for the benefits of nuclear power in terms of being a source of low carbon, secure energy to be, reappreciated. So it's taken a long time to recover from that accident. Yeah. There was very much a generational view of nuclear energy over the years. There was those who linked it with military uses, which had a negative impact, even though the civil nuclear side hasn't got a relationship with the military side. So those are the 1950s and 60s era through to the 70s. And then there was those who were around at the time of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, where there was another negative impact, if you like. But by the time you got to the 2000s and through, it was a different generation of people. And they were more concerned about whether or not they got power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and were much less bothered about things like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, etc. That was, something that happened in my grandparents' time, not in my time. And so it was only when Fukushima happened, which caused a small blip, actually, when people realized that the radiation impact was small and the devastation was more about the tsunami and the impact on the whole of the western seaboard of Japan than on nuclear stuff. So that really didn't have that big an impact either. But interestingly, the film, or rather the mini-series, Chernobyl, has actually caused a new generation of people to be asking similar sorts of questions about nuclear energy. So it's had the series itself has had quite an impact. No, we couldn't see another Chernobyl because most of the reactors in the world are not of that type, and the ones that are left of the Chernobyl type have been modified so that you wouldn't ever see an accident like that again. So no, you wouldn't ever see another
Good
Chernobyl.
news.
Nuclear plants don't radiate people. You get most of your radiation from background radiation just by living around. If you live in Cornwall or Aberdeen, you get a bigger radiation dose than if you live in Kent or somewhere like that, just because of the difference in the rocks. So you get a lot more radiation from background than you ever would from a nuclear power plant.
Who knew? We're learning so much tonight.
Yeah, it is true. It's because the way the wind blew that fateful day, it was coming from the east rather than our normal Atlantic fronts, and so and it rained, and so some of the dust cloud from Chernobyl was rained down on the Cumbrian fells and on the Welsh fells, and that meant that the grass was contaminated, and when the sheep ate the grass, the lambs at the time had above the standard levels of what's acceptable for sale and for eating. So it's true, it did affect the farms in Cumbria and in Wales. Yeah, I mean, the amount that's generated is actually small. The ultimate disposal is really a political decision rather than a scientific decision, because the ability to construct repositories from an engineering and a science standpoint is fine. Most of the UK's waste is actually held at Sellafield in any event. And so it's a question of what do you want to do with it very long term geologically. And at the moment, the government is out in consultation as to, where do you want it to be to deal with it permanently. But if you replace all of our existing reactors with new ones, you only add 10% to the volume of the waste that we've got to deal with anyway. Most of the UK's waste actually was generated in the very early years of nuclear power, when they were, developing the systems and getting things going. And with our choice of early reactors, they were more waste intensive than the modern reactors that everybody else uses globally. So volume wise, you're talking about the highly active waste, which is the sort that most people worry about. You're talking about 38 to 40 double-decker buses worth, something like that.
That's the classic metric for UK statistics, isn't it? How many buses?
Well, it's because everybody knows what one looks like. The whole of the waste inventory, including rubble, low-level waste, everything. It fits in something like 5 Albert Halls worth. The whole lot.
You're making it easy for us. Thank you.
Well, actually, that's interesting because although the HBO series wasn't completely right in the key person being a female. Russia and other Soviet states at the time, women have always been very good in the science and engineering world in Russia. I can remember going to Russia in the 1990s and being very impressed by the number of female Russians they had in their nuclear facilities, in their research labs and in their operational plants. Women right up to quite senior levels. So, it seemed as though if you were good at science and engineering in Russia, then you were given a chance, and it didn't really matter whether you were a man or a woman. You got a role. So although the key woman in the HBO series might not have been a factual person, I've no doubt that female scientists from the Ukraine and Russia itself were part of the movement to make sure all the information was made.
Yeah. And so what does the future hold, Sue? What are you and your colleagues excited about when it comes to nuclear power?
Well, I guess we're excited by the fact that it's finally getting recognition as a low carbon source of energy, which is important in the global world as we see it now. So we're excited about that. Excited by the fact that the UK government has put some money into the concept of small modular reactors. So, because the disadvantage of the big ones is that you need a huge amount of capital to finance them before you actually get any money from their operations. Most of the cost of electricity from nuclear energy comes from the capital cost that you have to, the money you have to borrow to build it, and the time over which you have to finance it before you start to get your money back. So, if you're building Hinkley Point and you're having to borrow £16 billion for the pair of them, and you're not going to see any return for between 7 and 10 years, that's a huge ask of anybody. And so globally, there's been a move to same sort of reactor, but smaller versions that can be built in factory. So you do a lot of the work in factory that you would otherwise have to do on site. And that increases the repeatability of the units. It improves the prospects for very high quality first time round. And also the fact that when you're building a lot, you're building a fleet all one after the other, a bit like you would aircraft engines, the costs come down. So just as the costs have come down for wind turbines over the last 7 or 8 years because of the numbers that are being built, if we actually built lots of small ones, the economics would improve compared with building 1 or 2 big ones every 10 years. So we're excited about that prospect as well, and the fact that a UK company, Rolls-Royce, has got a lead in that position.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sue.
Thanks, Sue. We'll see you in
Thanks,
half an hour,
everybody.
everyone.
Enjoy the session.